Write an equivalent ratio. You can just multiply the first and second number by the same quantity to turn it into an equivalent ratio. For example, I can multiply by 2. That would give me 10 and 4/5. And multiply this one by 2, which would give me 18 and 2/3. But whatever number you choose to multiply by, you have to do both of the numbers in the ratio for it to remain equivalent, just like in an equivalent fraction. This is a digital lesson, so you can follow along online or on the video. In this artwork, we can see that there are many different tints and shades or hues of colors. Today, we're going to be creating and comparing our own colors. What does the ratio 50-50 mean in terms of percent? Well, if something is 50-50, that means that it would be made up of 50% from one color and 50% of another color. A 50-50 mix has the same amount of both of the colors. And today we're going to look at how percents apply to what's called a mixture problem, like you can see here. You need to paint the walls in an office, and you use an app to explore color options. Test out the app and find a color you like. The app suggests a few colors. One is shown here. This color is made with a 50-50 mix of magenta paint and yellow paint. Describe what this ratio means in terms of percents. So 50% of the mixture is from magenta paint, and the remaining 50% is from yellow paint. Together, 50 and 50 make 100, which makes the entire mixture. Eve makes a paint by mixing 2 parts magenta with 8 parts of yellow. What percent is magenta? So altogether, there are 2 plus 8, that makes 10 parts. And it asks what percent is magenta. 2 of the parts are magenta. So if we cross multiply and divide, that would give us 20% is magenta. If 20% is magenta, and there are 10 parts total, and 8 come from yellow, cross multiplying and dividing here, that would mean 80% comes from the yellow paint. Ethan uses the app to create this paint mixture, in which the ratio of the amount of magenta paint to the amount of yellow paint is 2 to 3. What percent of this paint mixture is magenta? What percent is yellow? Explain how you know. Well, if we have magenta is 2 and the yellow is 3, that gives us 5 parts altogether. So magenta is 2 out of the 5. We can cross multiply and divide. And then the yellow is 3 out of the 5. and we can cross multiply and divide to figure out the percentage there. 40% is magenta and 60% is yellow. There are 5 parts altogether. Eve's paint mixture is 20% magenta and 80% yellow. Ethan's mixture is 40% magenta and 60% yellow. Whose paint color is more yellow, and why do you think so? Eve's paint color appears more yellow because it has a higher percentage of yellow in the mixture. 80% yellow in Eve's is greater than 60% yellow from Ethan's. Eve decides to mix pints of magenta and yellow paint to match the percents for her desired color. Ethan does the same for his desired color. Who uses more yellow paint? Eve would use more yellow paint because she has a higher percentage. However, that is assuming that they use the same amount of paint. But we don't necessarily know that they use the same amount of paint. If Eve only makes a mixture that uses 5 pints, and Ethan makes a mixture that uses 100 pints, Ethan's going to use more yellow, even though his percentage is lower, because he's going to make a mixture that has more paint altogether. Here it says Eve thinks it would be easiest to use 100 pints total in a mixture to make her desired color. How many pints of each color does she use? Well, if she's making 100 pints, 20 plus 80 makes 100 pints. So she would need 20 pints of magenta and 80 pints of yellow. When Ethan makes a mixture for his desired paint color, he uses 2.5 pints of magenta. And magenta was 40% of his mixture. So if we want to know about his whole mixture, we'll cross multiply and divide to figure out how many pints are in his entire mixture. So his entire mixture would require 6.25 pints. Eve and Ethan decide to combine their paint colors. What percent of their combined amount of paint is yellow? Round your answer to the nearest whole number percent. Well, they're yellow. Eve has 80 pints of yellow, and Ethan has 3.75 pints of yellow. So that is 83.75 pints of yellow. Altogether, Eve had 100 pints. And for Ethan, altogether he has 6.25 pints. So the total in their mixture would be 106.25 pints. So now we can cross multiply and divide. 83.75 times 100 divided by 106.25. And it does say to round your answer to the nearest whole number percent. So I got a value that was 78.8235, and it keeps going. But this 8 tells the 8 to round up to 79% approximately. When Eve and Ethan combined their paint, Eve said the mixture would be 30% magenta and 70% yellow. What error did Eve make, and how might you help her see why these cannot be the correct percents? Well, we see here that the magenta Eve had was 20 and Ethan had 40. So she just went for the average in between 20 and 40. And then for the yellow, Eve had 80 and Ethan had 60. And she said that the average would be 70. But we also need to explain how these cannot be the correct percents. Since Eve used more paint than Ethan's, her percentages are going to be more impacted or more impactful to the mixture. Someone started painting this room with a mixture of 25% cyan, 50% magenta, and 25% yellow, but they ran out of paint. Fortunately, you have extra pints of paint that you can use to make more paint of the same color. Well, 25% can be thought of as 1/4 of the mixture, and 50% can be thought of as 1/2 or 2/4. So if I used 4 pints, I would need 1 pint of cyan, 2 pints of magenta, and 1 pint of yellow. Then it says, give 2 other mixtures that result in these same paint colors. Well, if I had 1/4 and 2/4, if I wanted a total of 8, I could make that 2/8 and 4/8. And we can do another. If we times that by maybe 3, 1 times 3 is 3, 4 times 3 is 12. This one, 2 times 3 is 6, and 4 times 3 is 12. So we can put 3, 6 and 3. Noor wants to make a paint color that is a mixture of 25% cyan, 50% magenta, and 25% yellow. She mixes 2 pints of cyan and 4 pints of magenta, and she intends to add 2 pints of yellow to the mixture. Unfortunately, she adds 3 pints of yellow instead of 2. What can she do to fix this mistake and have her desired color? Be specific. Well, if she has 3 yellow, and the yellow is supposed to be 25%, then her entire mixture, if we cross multiply and divide, should be 12 pints. So she's going to need 3 for the yellow, and since cyan is the same percentage, she would need 3 cyan. So 3 yellow plus 3 cyan, that's only 6. So to get 12 for her entire mixture, she needs 6 of the magenta. Abdul wants to make a paint color that is a mixture of 20% cyan, 20% yellow, and 60% white. He mixes 1 pint of cyan and 3 pints of white. Unfortunately, he uses 1 pint of magenta instead of yellow. What can he do to fix this mistake and have the desired color? Be specific. The paint mixture he was going for did not include any magenta. It included cyan, yellow, and white. No amount of paint he adds will fix this mistake. Earlier, you made a mixture with this color. Find the percent of each type of paint used in the mixture. Round your answers to the nearest whole number percents. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 total. For cyan, I have 1 out of 8. If I cross multiply and divide here, that will tell me the percentage, which is 12.5. I have to round to the nearest whole number, so we're going to round up to 13%. Magenta is 2 out of 8 total. So 2 times 100 divided by 8 is 25%. I have 0 yellow, so 0 out of 8 is going to be 0%. Black is also 1 out of 8, which matches the cyan. And white is 4 out of 8. Cross multiply and divide here, and we get 50%. Now that doesn't quite add up to 100. If I added 50 and 13 and 25 and 13, I end up with 101. And the reason it's not exactly 100% is because I rounded these two values up from 12.5. If I use the decimals, I would get exactly 100%. Imagine that you mix your paint with Eve's paint. She used 20 pints of magenta and 80 pints of yellow. Find the percent of each color in your combined mixture of paint. So now instead of 2 magentas, I have 22. And instead of 0 yellow, I have 80 yellow. So Eve had no cyan, 20 pints of magenta, 80 pints of yellow, 0 black, 0 white, but 100 pints total. So now instead of 8 pints as my total, I have 108 pints as my total. For the cyan, I have 1 out of 108. And that's going to round up to 1%. It's like 0.925-ish, but we're going to round it up to a whole percent. Okay, then we have 22 magentas. 22 times 100 divided by 108 is about 20%. That one's going to round down slightly. 80 out of 108 for the yellow. 80 times 100 divided by 108 is 74% when we round. For the black, I have 1 out of 108, just like for the cyan, so I'm going to say that's also 1%. For the white, I have 4 out of 108 total. 4 times 100 divided by 108 is 3.7, which rounds up to 4%. And then I have the total. Well, if I had 8 and 100, that should be 108. So cross multiply and divide, that would give me 100%. If I add all of these, we should also get 100%. 1 plus 20 plus 74 plus 1 plus 4 is 100%. If yours doesn't come out exactly to 100%, it could be because we have what's called a round off error. When we round, it may adjust to be a little bit above 100 or a little bit below 100, but it should be very close to 100%. This artwork shows examples of gradients where one color transitions to another color. We are going to create our own gradient. You can think of paint swatches at the hardware store as gradients as well. It says shown is Synecdoche by artist Byron Kim. It was created with different shades, tones, hues, and tints. How can you recreate an artistic piece like this by using paint? We could add more white to a dark color to get a lighter hue or a lighter shade. You can adjust the percentage of color in the mixture to get different gradients of the same color. Try making your own gradient. What do you notice and what do you wonder? So if I keep the cyan and magenta the same, but I adjust the amount of white, you can see that it's getting lighter towards the bottom. You could also adjust the amount of black so that it gets darker. But we wouldn't want to add another color in there if we were trying to keep it the same color and just lightening it up. But you could also make a gradient that changes to a different color. It's just a different type of process. How can you make a smoother transition from one color to the next color? We may be able to slowly add in yellow or expand our gradient to include more steps along the way. That is the end of lesson 22 for making mixtures with percents and ratios.